The harsh March wind whipped through the streets of Boston, carrying with it the last vestiges of winter's chill. Inside his modest apartment, Michael Lawson sat at his desk, poring over financial reports. At 35, he had finally found his footing in life. A stable job as a financial analyst, a small but comfortable home, and a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The shrill ring of his cell phone cut through the silence, startling him. Michael glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing at the unfamiliar number. Against his better judgment, he answered, "Hello? Mike, it's Amber." The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost sheepish. Michael's grip on the phone tightened. Amber, his cousin. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not since that disastrous family reunion where old wounds were reopened and harsh words exchanged. What could she possibly want after all this time? Amber, he replied, his tone carefully neutral. This is unexpected. A nervous laugh crackled through the line. Yeah, I know. Look, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. I'm in a bit of a tight spot, and well, I was hoping you might be able to help me out. Michael closed his eyes, a sinking feeling in his stomach. Of course. It always came down to money with Amber. What kind of help? He asked, though he already knew the answer. I hate to ask, but I'm behind on rent, and if I don't come up with $2,000 by the end of the week, I'm going to be evicted. I've tried everything, Mike. You're my last hope. Michael pinched the bridge of his nose, conflicting emotions warring within him. On one hand, Amber was family, and there had been a time when they were close. On the other, their history was complicated, and he'd worked hard to distance himself from the drama that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Amber, I don't know if I can do that, he began carefully. Things are tight for me too, and please, Mike, Amber cut in, her voice taking on a desperate edge. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. I'll pay you back, I swear. I just need a little time to get back on my feet. Michael's mind raced. He did have some savings, but he'd been carefully setting that aside for his own future. And yet, the thought of his cousin, of anyone, being thrown out on the street made his stomach churn. Let me think about it, he said finally. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do. Can I call you back tomorrow? There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a soft sigh. Yeah, okay. Thanks for even considering it, Mike. I really appreciate it. As Michael hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a precipice. Something about the conversation left him uneasy, a nagging sense that there was more to Amber's sudden reappearance in his life than a simple request for help. He turned back to his computer, the financial reports now forgotten. Instead, he pulled up his bank statement, staring at the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into a solution. $2,000. It wasn't an insignificant amount, especially not with his own bills looming. As the evening wore on, Michael found himself lost in memories of his childhood. Summers spent with Amber, laughing and carefree. When had things gone so wrong between them? And more importantly, what was the right thing to do now? Sleep eluded him that night as he tossed and turned, weighing his options. By morning, he had made his decision. He only hoped it was the right one. Little did Michael know, his choice would set in motion a chain of events that would upend his carefully constructed life and force him to confront painful truths about his past, his family, and himself. A week had passed since Michael's fateful phone call with Amber. The memory of their conversation still gnawed at him, but he stood firm in his decision. He couldn't risk his financial stability for someone who had been absent from his life for so long, regardless of their shared blood. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when his phone buzzed with a text message. Michael's heart sank as he saw Amber's name on the screen. With a deep breath, he opened the message. I guess family doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Don't worry, I won't bother you again. Michael stared at the words, a mixture of guilt and frustration washing over him. He began to type a response, trying to explain his position, but stopped short. What good would it do? Amber had always been quick to play the victim, twisting situations to suit her narrative. He set the phone aside, resolving to let the matter rest. If only it had been that simple. The next morning, Michael woke to a barrage of notifications. Missed calls, text messages, and emails flooded his phone, all from family members he hadn't spoken to in years. Confused and alarmed, he opened the most recent message from his Aunt Linda. How could you, Michael? I always thought you were a good boy. I'm disgusted and heartbroken. His hands shaking, Michael scrolled through the messages, each one more accusatory than the last. It wasn't until he reached a forwarded email from his cousin Jake that the full horror of the situation became clear. Amber told us everything about what you did to her at the family reunion 10 years ago, how you took advantage of her when she was vulnerable. She's been carrying this pain for a decade, and now you have the audacity to turn her away in her time of need. You're no longer welcome in this family. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to spin around him as the implications of Amber's lie sank in. She had accused him of sexual assault, a completely fabricated story about an incident that never happened. In a daze, he called in sick to work and spent the day trying to piece together what was happening. More messages poured in, some from people he barely knew, all condemning him for a crime he hadn't committed. It seemed Amber had taken to social media, spreading her false story far and wide. By evening, Michael felt like he was drowning. He had tried reaching out to a few family members to explain his side, but his calls went unanswered. Amber herself had blocked his number. In the span of 24 hours, his reputation had been shattered, and he felt powerless to defend himself. As he sat in his darkened apartment, his phone lit up with yet another notification. This time it was an email from his boss. Michael, we need to talk. Please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. The weight of everything crashed down on him at once. Not only had Amber's lie torn apart his family relationships, but now his professional life was in jeopardy as well. How could he prove his innocence against an accusation from so long ago? How could he fight a lie that had already spread so far? Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He knew he was innocent, but in the court of public opinion, the damage had already been done. As the night wore on, one thought kept repeating in his mind. How could he rebuild his life from the ashes of this devastating false accusation? Little did he know, the battle to clear his name was only just beginning, and the road ahead would test him in ways he never imagined. The fluorescent lights of the HR office buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on Michael's pale face. Across the desk, his boss, Sarah, and the company's HR representative, Tom, wore matching expressions of concern and discomfort. Michael, Sarah began, her voice carefully neutral, we've become aware of some serious allegations against you. I'm sure you understand that we have to take these claims very seriously. Michael nodded numbly, his throat dry. I understand, but I need you to know that these accusations are completely false. My cousin is... Tom held up a hand, cutting him off. We're not here to investigate the validity of the claims, Michael. That's not our role. However, given the public nature of the accusations and the potential impact on the company's reputation, we've decided it's best if you take a leave of absence while this situation is resolved. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. A leave of absence? But I haven't done anything wrong. You can't just... I'm afraid we can, Sarah interjected, her expression softening slightly. It's paid leave, Michael. We're not firing you, but we need to protect the company, and right now your presence here is problematic. Michael left the office in a daze, his personal belongings stuffed hastily into a cardboard box. As he walked through the parking lot, he could feel the stares of his coworkers burning into his back. News traveled fast, and he knew that by now everyone had heard the rumors. The drive home was a blur. Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of how quickly his life had unraveled. It had been just over a week since Amber's call, and now he found himself isolated, his reputation in tatters, and his career hanging by a thread. As he unlocked the door to his apartment, his phone buzzed with a notification. With a sense of dread, he checked the screen. It was a message from his landlord. Mr. Lawson, I've received several concerning reports about your character. Given the nature of these allegations, I'm terminating your lease effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Michael's legs gave out, and he slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor. How had things spiraled so far out of control? He was innocent, yet he felt like he was being punished for a crime he didn't commit. As the shock began to wear off, a new emotion took its place: determination. He couldn't let Amber's lies destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. He needed to fight back, to clear his name. But how? With shaking hands, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd use. Jack Morrison, an old college friend who had become a lawyer specializing in defamation cases. Jack, it's Michael Lawson. I I need your help. I've been accused of something terrible, something I didn't do, and it's tearing my life apart." As Michael recounted the events of the past week to his friend, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Jack listened intently, asking pointed questions and taking notes. "This won't be easy, Mike," Jack said when Michael finished his story. "False accusations like this can be incredibly damaging, and proving your innocence will be an uphill battle, but I believe you, and I'm willing to help. We'll need to move fast, though. The longer these rumors circulate unchallenged, the harder they'll be to disprove." Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight ahead. "Whatever it takes, Jack. I can't let this lie stand. I need to clear my name, not just for me, but for the truth." As he hung up the phone, Michael felt a mix of emotions: fear, anger, and a grim determination. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it head on. He had lost so much already, he couldn't afford to lose anything else. Little did he know, the journey to reclaim his life and reputation would lead him down unexpected paths, forcing him to confront not only Amber's lies, but also long-buried family secrets that would shake the very foundation of his world. The following weeks were a blur of legal consultations, sleepless nights, and increasingly desperate attempts to salvage what remained of Michael's life. Jack had wasted no time in drafting cease and desist letters to those who had been most vocal in spreading Amber's accusations, but the damage to Michael's reputation seemed to grow with each passing day. It was during one of their late-night strategy sessions that Jack proposed an idea that would change everything. "Mike, we need to go on the offensive," Jack said, his voice tired but determined. "We've been playing defense, trying to put out fires, but what if we could prove that Amber has a history of making false accusations or manipulating people for money?" Michael frowned, considering the idea. "How would we even begin to do that?" "I've got a friend who's a private investigator," Jack replied. "She's discreet, thorough, and not afraid to dig deep. If there's dirt to be found on Amber, she'll will fast us to find it." The thought of investigating his own cousin made Michael uncomfortable, but he realized he had little choice. His entire life was hanging in the balance. "Do it," he said finally. "Whatever it takes." Over the next few days, Michael found himself immersed in a world he never thought he'd be part of. He met with Jack's investigator friend, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, and shared everything he knew about Amber: her last known address, her workplaces, mutual acquaintances. As Rachel began her investigation, Michael threw himself into his own research. He created a timeline of the past decade, marking every interaction he could remember with Amber and other family members. He scoured old emails and text messages, looking for any clue that might help his case. It was during this process that Michael stumbled upon something odd. In an old family email thread from 8 years ago, there was a heated exchange between his Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert. The subject was vague, something about protecting the family name, but the tone was unmistakably tense. Intrigued, Michael dug deeper. He found more cryptic messages, hushed conversations at family gatherings that he had dismissed at the time. A pattern began to emerge, one of secrets and cover-ups. Just as Michael was starting to piece together this family puzzle, Rachel called with her first report. "Michael, I found something interesting," she said, her voice crackling over the phone. "It seems Amber has a history of financial troubles. I've uncovered at least 3 instances in the past 5 years where she's borrowed significant sums of money from different family members, always with a sob story attached." Michael's heart raced. It wasn't proof of her lying about the assault, but it was a start. "Anything else?" he asked. Rachel paused. "There's one more thing, but it's complicated. I found a police report from 7 years ago. Amber filed a complaint against a former employer, claiming sexual harassment. The case was dropped due to lack of evidence. But, but what?" Michael pressed. "The details of her complaint, they're eerily similar to the story she's telling about you now." The revelation hit Michael like a thunderbolt. Could Amber have recycled an old lie, adapting it to use against him? The possibility was both horrifying and, in a twisted way, hopeful. It could be the key to proving his innocence. As Michael hung up the phone, his mind was reeling. He had started this journey hoping to clear his name, but now he found himself unraveling a web of family secrets that went far beyond Amber's false accusation. He stared at the timeline he had created, at the cryptic family emails, at Rachel's report. Something bigger was at play here. something that had been festering in the shadows of his family for years. With a deep breath, Michael made a decision. He couldn't just defend himself against Amber's lies anymore. He needed to uncover the whole truth, no matter how painful it might be. Only by bringing everything to light could he hope to truly clear his name and put this nightmare behind him. As he picked up his phone to call Jack and share his new insights, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would change his life and his family forever. Armed with Rachel's findings and his own discoveries, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He and Jack spent the next few days strategizing their next moves, carefully building a case that would not only defend Michael, but also expose the deeper issues within his family. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Michael decided to take a risk. He called his Aunt Linda, the one who had been involved in those cryptic email exchanges years ago. To his surprise, she agreed to meet him at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The bell above the cafe door chimed as Linda walked in, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. She sat across from Michael, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee mug. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If the family finds out—" Michael leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Aunt Linda, I need to know the truth. What happened 7 years ago? What were you and Uncle Robert trying to protect?" Linda's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. "How did you— Oh, Michael, it's all such a mess." Over the next hour, Linda unraveled a tale that left Michael reeling. 7 years ago, Amber had accused her boss of sexual harassment, just as Rachel had discovered. But there was more to the story. The family had rallied around Amber, believing her implicitly. They had pooled resources to hire a high-powered lawyer, determined to bring the man down. "But then," Linda continued, her voice shaking, "we found out it wasn't true. Amber had made it all up because she was about to be fired for embezzlement." We were horrified, Michael. We had nearly ruined an innocent man's life. "So what happened?" Michael pressed, his heart pounding. Linda looked away, shame evident in her features. We covered it up, paid the man a substantial sum to keep quiet. We thought we were protecting Amber, protecting the family name, but we were wrong. So terribly wrong." As Linda's story unfolded, the pieces began to fall into place. The family's misguided attempt to protect Amber had only enabled her behavior, allowing her to continue manipulating others for years. "And now," Michael said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "she's done it again. To me." Linda reached across the table, grasping Michael's hand. "I'm so sorry, Michael. We should have seen it coming. We should have stopped her years ago." As they parted ways, Michael felt a mix of vindication and sadness. He had the truth now, or at least part of it. But the cost of that truth was the shattering of his family's facade. Back at his apartment, Michael called Jack to update him on the new developments. As they discussed their next steps, a plan began to form. They would confront Amber, armed with evidence of her past deceptions. They would offer her a chance to retract her accusations and come clean, in exchange for the family's help in getting her the professional help she clearly needed. But if she refused, they were prepared to go public with everything. The false accusation against Michael, the covered-up incident from 7 years ago, all of it. As Michael hung up the phone, he felt a strange calm settle over him. The path ahead was clear now, though it wouldn't be easy. He was no longer just fighting for his own reputation, but for the truth itself. He looked at the photo of his family on his desk, taken years ago at a happier time. So much had changed since then. Relationships had been strained, trust had been broken. But maybe, just maybe, by bringing everything to light, they could begin to heal. With a deep breath, Michael picked up his phone one more time. It was time to set up a meeting with Amber. Time to confront the lies head on and reclaim his life. As he dialed her number, Michael steeled himself for what was sure to be the most difficult conversation of his life. But he was ready. The truth, no matter how painful, was about to come out. The small conference room at Jack's law office felt suffocating as Michael waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack sat beside him, a reassuring presence, as they both stared at the door. Any minute now, Amber would walk through it. When the knock finally came, Michael almost jumped out of his skin. Jack squeezed his shoulder supportively before calling out, "Come in!" Amber entered, her face a mask of defiance. She was flanked by a man Michael didn't recognize, her lawyer, he assumed. As they took their seats across the table, The tension in the room was palpable. "Let's cut to the chase," Amber's lawyer began, his voice clipped. "Why have you called us here? If this is some attempt to intimidate my client—" Jack held up a hand, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about intimidation. It's about the truth." Michael took a deep breath, looking directly at Amber for the first time. "Amber, I know about the incident 7 years ago. The false accusation against your boss, the cover-up, all of it." Amber's face paled, but she quickly recovered, her eyes flashing with anger. "I don't know what you're talking about. Is this how you try to discredit victims? By making up lies?" "They're not lies," Michael replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We have proof. The police report, the settlement documents, even testimonies from family members who were involved in the cover-up." Jack slid a folder across the table. "Everything's in here. The false accusation from 7 years ago, documentation of your financial manipulations of family members, and evidence that contradicts your current claims against Michael." Amber's lawyer quickly flipped through the documents, his expression growing increasingly grim. Amber herself seemed to shrink in her chair, the bravado draining from her face. "Here's what's going to happen," Jack continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to publicly retract your accusations against Michael. You're going to admit that you lied, and you're going to apologize for the damage you've caused." Amber's eyes darted between Michael, Jack, and her own lawyer. "And if I don't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael leaned forward, his gaze locked with Amber's. "Then we go public with everything. Not just about me, but about what happened 7 years ago. About all the times you've manipulated family members for money. Everything." The room fell silent as the weight of Michael's words sank in. Amber's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she seemed lost in thought, her eyes unfocused. Finally, Amber spoke, her voice trembling. I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed the money, and when you said no, I got so angry. I thought I could scare you into giving it to me. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Not really." Tears began to stream down her face. "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry." The admission, while a relief, didn't erase the pain and damage of the past weeks. Michael felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of pity for his troubled cousin. "Amber," he said softly, "you need help, real help, not just for this, but for whatever's driving you to do these things. The family. We've enabled you for too long. That stops now." Over the next hour, they hammered out the details. Amber would make a public statement retracting her accusations. She would enter therapy and a financial management program. The family would support her recovery, but with strict conditions and oversight. As Amber and her lawyer left the room, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road to rebuilding his life and repairing his reputation would be long, but for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. Jack clapped him on the back. "You did it, Mike. It's over." But Michael knew it wasn't really over. It was just the beginning of healing, of rebuilding trust, of facing the hard truths that had been buried for too long. As he left the office and stepped into the sunlight, Michael took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner somehow, the world a little brighter. He had faced his darkest moment and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. With a small smile, he headed home, ready to start the next chapter of his life, one built on truth, resilience, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from weathering life's fiercest storms. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Amber. The summer heat had given way to the crisp air of early autumn, and Michael found himself sitting on a park bench, watching the leaves change color. So much had changed in his life, mirroring the transformation of the season. The day after Amber's retraction went public, Michael's phone had been flooded with messages, apologies, expressions of support, and tentative attempts to reconnect from family members who had shunned him. His boss had called personally to invite him back to work, praising his handling of the situation and offering a promotion as a gesture of goodwill. Yet, despite the vindication, Michael found that rebuilding wasn't as simple as he had hoped. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. He had returned to work, but conversations with coworkers still sometimes faltered, weighted with unspoken tension. Some family relationships remained strained, the memory of quick judgments and harsh words lingering like a shadow. Amber had kept her word, entering therapy and a financial management program. Reports from the family members overseeing her progress were cautiously optimistic. Michael had not spoken to her directly since the confrontation, unsure if he was ready for that step. As he sat in the park, Michael reflected on the lessons of the past months. He had learned the hard way about the power of lies, the fragility of reputation, and the complexity of family dynamics. But he had also discovered an inner strength he never knew he possessed, and a capacity for forgiveness that surprised him. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his Aunt Linda. "Family dinner this Sunday. Amber will be there. She's made a lot of progress and would like to apologize in person. No pressure, but we'd love to have you there." Michael stared at the message, his heart racing. Was he ready for this? Could he sit across the table from the person who had nearly destroyed his life? He thought about declining, about giving himself more time. But then he remembered something his therapist had told him. Healing doesn't always happen on our preferred timeline. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to take the opportunity when it presents itself. With a deep breath, Michael typed his reply, "I'll be there." As he hit send, he felt a mix of anxiety and hope. This dinner wouldn't magically fix everything, he knew that. There would still be awkward moments, difficult conversations, and a long road ahead to truly rebuild trust. But it was a start. Michael stood up from the bench, stretching as he took in the beauty of the park around him. The trees, with their mix of green and golden leaves, seemed to symbolize his own journey, holding on to the good while allowing space for change and growth. He began to walk home, his steps feeling lighter than they had in months. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Michael felt ready to face it head on. He had weathered the storm of false accusations and family secrets, emerging not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. As he walked, Michael made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to stand for the truth, even when it was difficult. He would work on forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself. And he would never again take for granted the power of his own voice and the strength of his character. The sun was setting as Michael reached his apartment building, casting a warm glow over the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities, and Michael was ready for both. He paused at his door, taking one last look at the twilight sky. A sense of peace washed over him, and for the first time in a long time, Michael smiled. A genuine, hopeful smile. Whatever came next, he knew he had the strength to face it. With that thought, he stepped inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life, one built on truth, resilience, and the hard-won wisdom of his journey.